Hey folks, so welcome back to the channel. As promised, for Mental Health Month, I am talking about mental health disorders and what we can do to combat particular disorders. Each week we're doing a specific disorder, and for this week I want to focus on eating disorders. So this is something that I have personal experience of. I suffered with an eating disorder for a period of around about 3 years. And it was an eating disorder that didn't fit nicely into one particular category. There was a little bit of orthorexia, which is a fixation on eating healthy food. There was a bit of anorexia, the compulsion to be thin and lose weight. There was an element of bulimia, with a cycle of binging and purging. So I had a little bit of everything, a little bit of a mix of different types of experience. So I hope that I'm able to relate to anyone who's watching this who may have an eating disorder. And at the end of the day, whilst eating disorders may manifest in different ways, they often have similar underlying causes. So what started my eating disorder for me was when I was 17. I got jumped by a group of 4 guys, and I was with my girlfriend. I was walking her home and I got beaten up in front of her, and this was such a emasculating and helpless experience. And later on, years afterwards, I was able to look back and realize that that was the starting point. That was where my behavior started, and that experience generated in me sort of the unconscious desire or realization that, hey, if I'd had a 6-pack and, it was shredded and looked like I had some muscle, those 4 guys wouldn't have bothered to jump me. And that was a poisonous thought that took root in my mind and started to spread over the coming years. And so I got a fixation on exercise and losing weight and trying to get my body fat as low as possible to look lean and shredded so that I looked masculine, which of course wasn't helped by the increasing media portrayals of men, how men are eroticized by the media now, how we're shown this kind of pinnacle of man, which is the kind of the 300 Spartan sort of look, the 6-pack, 8-pack, bulging biceps, veiny, shredded, and that was a very negative image for me to have. So I had a number of eating disorder behaviors. I had the restriction of food, ritualistic meal times, a fear of unsafe foods. On one occasion, I made myself throw up to purge, but usually my method of purging would be through exercise. I would use exercise as a compensatory measure for any excess calories that I perceive myself to eat. So that's a brief kind of breakdown of my experience. Let's look at this condition further and really break down what an eating disorder actually is and how individuals suffering with it feel and what a day-to-day life looks like for them. So, misconception number 1, such a powerful misconception that I myself, who is suffering from an eating disorder, had, was eating disorders are not about food and not about the way you look. Yes, that is the surface expression of an eating disorder. Lots of people with an eating disorder are focused on and worried about food. They're focused on and worried about the way that they look. But this is a superficial expression of something that is deeper and more ingrained and going on underneath the surface. So let's break this down with my personal example. So I got focused on food and I became frighteningly ritualistic and obsessive about things like meal timing, portion sizes, what I ate, how much I ate. What was the underlying issue of this? control. See, going back to that time that I got beaten up was a loss of control. I felt so helpless, and thus I sought to re-establish control. And one of the ways that I can do this was through my food. I could control what I was eating, when I was eating, how much I was eating. So, whilst it looked like I was focused on the food and using the food to manipulate the way that I looked, and that was a thought going through my mind. I was looking to use food, or to not use food, to manipulate the way that I looked. But I wanted to look a different way. Why? Because I thought it would give me control. So that issue of control is a common underlying issue in people with eating disorders, certainly with people that I've worked with both back in my time when I was volunteering and now working with clients, is it all seems to come back to control. There is something that has gone on or is going on in a person's life that makes them feel like they've lost control, and often they seek that control through an eating disorder. So that's probably the most common misconception that I want to break, that it's about that eating disorders are about food and it's about the way that you look. Really, eating disorders are all about emotion, and in fact, most mental health conditions in general are about emotion. So for me, emotions were very tied in with my eating disorder. My eating disorder behaviors would change depending on what emotion I was expressing or wished to suppress. So for example, if I was feeling quite high, quite joyous, quite excited and lively, this would trigger restrictive behaviors in me, because I would get a high and a sense of accomplishment off of restricting my food, and I would get what a lot of people with eating disorders find is they get a starvation high, because this is a more biological kind of explanation. When you start to starve yourself, your body reacts and it triggers almost like a fight or flight response. If you go back to evolutionary times, if you were starving, then you needed to go and find some food. So what your body does is it starts to kick in neurotransmitters that give you energy and drive. It's like tapping into your emergency fuel source, where your body goes, oh my goodness, we're starving, we need to bring out the backup generator and get this person out so they can go and forage and they can go and hunt. So we actually get a starvation high. So certainly something that I got, and I'm sure if there's anyone watching this who's had a eating disorder can relate to, is you get a starvation high. So if you've gone a while without food, or you've been restricting those portion sizes, you get a feeling of elation and lightness. You get this kind of high feeling. So I would often turn to restrictive eating disorders when I was feeling good about myself, because that would actually enhance that positive feeling. So mental health conditions are not always about the negative stuff, but focusing on the negative. If I was feeling angry or stressed out or upset, that is when the binging was more likely to occur. I would seek that comfort eating and that emotional kind of blanket of eating lots of food. Because again, when we eat lots of food, stuff goes on with our biology and our neurotransmitters. It feels good to eat a lot. It triggers neurotransmitters such as dopamine, which is our reward neurotransmitter. So if you have a nice bit of sugar, sugar goes straight for those dopamine receptors. If any of you have noticed, after you have a donut or a cake or even like a really ripe banana, which is quite high in sugar, you kind of feel a little buzz after it, don't you? Part of that is the sugar goes through and activates your dopamine receptors. So you get that feeling of reward. You think, oh, that was nice, I'll treat myself to another one. So if you've had a bad day, if I had been upset, stressed out, I would turn to the binging. Now, of course, if the binging occurs, then you feel shame and guilt and frustration at yourself because you've broken your rules, you've broken your code. And even if I had those feelings in general, if something during the day had made me feel shameful or guilty, that's when the compensatory behaviors come in. And for me, that was exercise. If I felt ashamed or guilty, I would go and try to burn away that shame and guilt. I would go and run or swim or go for a sauna and lift weights, anything that could purge that feeling from me. And I know sufferers with bulimia do that in a slightly different way, often through throwing up or taking laxatives. And my biggest moment of shame and guilt, that's exactly what I did. I did make myself throw up. So that's a kind of overview of how the eating disorder behaviors often manifest themselves as a way to process or alleviate the emotions that that individual is feeling. So I'm going to try and make this as brief as possible. So I'm going to mention one last thing that is quite pertinent to eating disorders, which is what is called the ed voice. And this is almost like a split personality, in that you have this voice that's always going on in the back of your head that reinforces and enhances, says, oh, don't put too much on your plate, that's too much, you're going to get fat, or oh, look at you, you're worthless, you're pathetic, go on, stuff that cake in your mouth, how does that feel? And it's a really strong reinforcer, and a lot of the people that I've worked with who have eating disorders talk about this ED voice. They talk about they want to change, but there's something in them that keeps on reinforcing and rehearsing this. And just to really home in this point, this isn't like a hallucinogenic voice. It's not the kind of voice that schizophrenia sufferers may have, where it is a sensory or auditory experience. It's a metaphorical voice, but it's still that underlying demon, that underlying slave master who keeps on reinforcing the behaviors. So something we'll talk about in the next video about techniques is how to talk back to your ED voice, how to tell it to go shove itself, basically. So I'll finish off with advice to people who don't have eating disorders, but they have someone close to them who they are aware of, who looks like they're manifesting, or indeed you have evidence of them manifesting eating disorder behaviors. So looking back on our previous lessons, number one, it's not about the food and the way that they look. So don't try to help them out through sneaking extra food onto their plates or telling them that they look fine, because they are not going to believe you and they will not appreciate you messing with their routines and rituals. I know my dad, when he cottoned on to what I was doing, started to try and do this, and it made me really angry and I rebelled. I remember one time he made us meatballs and spaghetti, and now I was only allowed 6 meatballs. That was my arbitrary rule that I'd given myself, and I noticed he'd sneaked a 7th one in. So I picked it out and threw it in the bin. That is how someone with an eating disorder will think and feel about your attempt to shove food in them. Or alternatively, if they're a binger, then your attempts to take food away from them. They will resent you and it will drive you further away from them. So please, please do not do that. The way to help them is focusing on that second point we talked about, is the emotions. That person has an eating disorder because there is something emotionally going on in them that is painful and scary, and the only way that they feel that they can deal with it is through this protective mechanism of eating disorder behaviors, however it is that it manifests. So don't focus on the food and the way that they look. Focus on being comforting and supporting to them. Give them an ear and quality time through which they can speak to you. It's likely that they won't have the courage to speak to you about their eating disorder behaviors, but they can maybe just talk to you about their everyday stresses and strains, things that they're not embarrassed about. And by giving them a sounding board for those negative emotions, they might not feel the need to go and do some restriction or do some purging, because they've managed to alleviate that negative emotion by speaking to you. So that is the best thing that you can do for someone you know, who you wish to support, who you wish to help. I know it sounds cliched, I know it sounds simple, but people with eating disorders are really just, they're struggling and they're crying out for help. And if you can help alleviate that struggle and give them just that little bit of emotional time, that will do wonders. So guys, I hope you found this video informative and educational, and for anyone out there who's suffering with an eating disorder, I hope you find it inspiring or reassuring that, you know, there is something on the other side of an eating disorder. There is recovery, there is light at the end of the tunnel. These issues that you have can be resolved. So folks, I look forward to speaking to you in the next video, where we're going to outline some tools and strategies through which you can start to combat these eating disorders. Until then, love inwardly and shine outwardly. David.